So we might open up straight to the floor. Does anyone have any questions for any of the speakers?
It's a quick question. In your opinion, what is the most healthful thing to do from the point that the sun goes down to when you get yourself into bed? There'd be a few hours, I imagine.
Is that directed at anyone particularly, Mel?
I'm interested in everyone's opinion, I suppose, on, the sun goes down maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock, but...
So I mean, I understand, so it's going to be individual dependent. I understand that you're a very, very busy, productive, entrepreneurial lady with a family. So I would actually, and this is, I don't have an affiliation with Daylight, but you're constantly making podcasts, Great Birth Rebellion content. You would probably benefit from having those lights really low at eye level or below, you working on something like a daylight computer for maybe an hour or two after sunset, and then commencing your wind down, but still respecting the circadian signals such that you don't have overhead isolated blue light and visible only light. And then at some point switching off from a work mode, which is hard, I know, and then really engaging in that deep wind down phase, and having a dark pair of blue blockers on, if that's the case, that you have to have other light sources.
Yeah, I mean, I would just try and be low stimulation, right? Like kind of Max said, and don't eat late, don't exercise, try and wind down. And even if you're on a daylight or something, or have blue blockers or screen filter on, like whatever work you're trying to do, make it like pretty easy in terms of the stimulation level. But that's all I had.
I reiterate those points as well. I think low stimulation is the best way to put it, because it covers all aspects, not just the light, but you don't want to be doing really hard, involved intellectual work at 9 p.m. It's not really ideal. But everything, if you can just avoid any sort of high sort of stimulation, you'd be doing pretty well.
I think from a hormonal perspective, the work that you're doing, you really want to be quite conscious of the type of work you're doing, dependent on what time of the day it is. Too close? Oh, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Is it that mic? Okay. Maybe just use one mic. Pass it through.
Keep this one. So electromagnetic. So all of your hard work that you have to use your brain for, try and do it during the day, and then the more relaxing work that you actually enjoy, do it at nighttime. Also, a lot of devices, they give off EMF, which is doing what carbs do to your body. So upregulating blood glucose, which will make you crave carbohydrates. So I would just be cutting my food off at 5 o'clock. I wouldn't be eating after sunset, and then being really conscious, because you don't want to block that leptin reception at around 10 p.m. You want to keep that open, which means that you want to keep insulin low, which means, turning off the Wi-Fi when you can, doing all the things, and then cutting your carb intake, because that's the carb that you can control.
I've got a question for Tristan. Kids love iPads, on the plane, in the car, at restaurants. Do they enjoy the daylight computer as well? Do they still get stuck into it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a choice between like a daylight or nothing, like they will choose that every time. Obviously, they're probably going to choose like the bright blue Candy Crush like iPad experience. But the problem is when you take it away from them, like they throw a fit, right? I mean, I don't have kids, but I've looked up plenty of videos and anecdotal evidence. They lose their mind when you take an iPad away from them. Why? Because their cognitive development is trying to just be in that environment, and they're so much more sensitive to the stimulation. Whereas a daylight, the anecdotal evidence I have is that they're still upset, but it's not the level of tantrum to where like, the whole day is ruined. So it's something for me. I actually selfishly was like, wow, now I could give my future children a device and not be totally guilty about it. Whereas before I was like, you're not getting a phone till you're like 20. Yeah.
Cool.
Question nice and short for everyone.
Question for Tristan, please. I've got the timber in the car for building my Faraday cage because I know I need to, because I've got mitochondrial illness with damaged ion channels and mercury, lead, tin, nickel and aluminium that crashed. Mercury, lead, tin, nickel and aluminium that crashed cytochrome 4 basically. With regard to that, I'm putting silver threaded sheets in. Is there any dirty electricity coming from the mains ground? Because I think I need to ground it independently outside, because our electricity our AC used to be pumped back to the power plant, but these days they just inject it into the ground. And if I use that existing AC ground, am I going to induce more issues?
Yeah, so the question about grounding, dirty electricity, and you guys sending your stray neutral to ground. I will always advocate for grounding directly into the earth, like 100%. I don't trust the wiring in my house. You're making yourself part of like the AC circuit, whereas if you isolate it with a conductive rod in outside, then that's way better off, and you're just, it's just you and the earth. However, if you do have like power lines running underground, I would just make sure to, wherever you're sticking a rod in the earth, it's not near any power distribution equipment. But yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Oh, I've got a group of friends who we're like a chat group on health, and ironically, half the group's gone vegan. I haven't had much success getting them over to the carnivore. And so we're all talking about measurements. You have to measure this, you have to measure that. And I say, well, I can just measure myself by how I feel, and maybe the odd blood test and the odd other. And one of them's pushing me to get a Garmin watch. So I'm a bit torn on that with the EMF. So I wonder what your views on those sort of smart watch devices are.
I mean, I'm not a fan of wearing anything that emits EMFs for an extended period of time. So again, the problem with AirPods, Bluetooth is really low power, but you're wearing them directly on your body, and especially next to your brain. Same with a Garmin watch. I don't know if you can disable Bluetooth or what have you. The rest of the EMFs are probably not that bad, but how long are you going to wear it? Are you going to wear it for like a 30-minute run? Then sure, that's not like a huge, if you're training for a marathon, like that might be really valuable to you. But these people who wear Apple Watches and AirPods for 14 hours a day, I think if you're a finance bro, they sleep in them. So you really like the chronic duration and distance is problematic. And, there's some meridians and, important areas for your body on your wrists that, I'm wearing a Casio watch here, so I'm not a digital guy. Max is also based.
Oh, thank you. What's your opinion of EMF mitigation devices like these Blue Shield things?
Is it a harmonizer? What is it? Just like
I can't remember actually what this is, but this is one of what they call their premier something or other.
Do you just like carry it and then like you're good? Is that their marketing?
They say you just carry. It's the travel version of it. I actually can't remember the science behind it.
Yeah. So those type of EMF mitigation devices, I'm highly skeptical about, because there's no like physics for that to work, right? Like what I said in the beginning was our electrical power is 50 hertz. Our Wi-Fi is 2.4 billion. How is it harmonizing all of that and then keeping the good stuff from coming through? It doesn't make sense to me from a physics perspective. However, again, if you buy like a shungite crystal and it like makes you feel good and like placebo effect is real, and then there's always the opportunity that we don't know what we don't know, and some Swiss or German scientists, which is usually what these companies say on their website, figured out some proprietary thing, and it's energy neutralizing. And I've talked to researchers that say the same thing I do, and they've measured it with some like equipment, and they'll be like 98% of them don't do anything, but then they're like, for some reason, like 1 or 2 do. So yeah, if it's $1,000, I would not buy it. But if it's like $50 and it makes you feel good about yourself, then there's no harm, no foul. But yeah, the research behind those things are not direct enough for me.
I'm not sure who I'm directing this at, but could someone just explain the difference between overhead light at night and putting the light low, below knee level, was it?
Max will probably be able to explain it better than me, but I believe that there's a different distribution of receptors on the top part of the retina versus the bottom. So at night, there's less receptors on the top. So if light's coming from the ground up, it's less disruptive.
Yeah, in the ancestral and evolutionary past, the time that you would have blue light is going to be overhead. This is based on the transition of the sun in the sky. So the density of that melanopsin in the part of the retina is greater, sensing light overhead. That means that potentially any kind of light, because there's a distribution of activation. It's not like 480 is 480 nanometers is the only point it activates. There's just a curve, action spectrum. So the point is just the position of light as well as the intensity, the lux, as well as the wavelength are all relevant. But it's complicated, but simply have one of those warmer lights, like candlelight perhaps, like a very low intensity red LED closer to the ground, and that feels good. Intuitively, it feels better. And remember, when the sun's lower in the sky, that is when we expected more of that red and infrared light. So,
thank you.
Cindy.
You can be next.
I love to read, and I have a Kindle. It's a paperwhite. How does that affect me at night? Because I usually read when I go to bed.
Yeah. Does your Kindle have a night mode, or?
It's an old one.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So any of the backlights will still be emitting blue light. And then the night mode, whether it's on your iPhone or the new Kindles have a night mode backlight, they still have blue light. So on my presentation, the last one that I show with like the candle was like the iPad night shifted, and that still has blue light. Literally the only way a modern screen is blue light free is if you go to the settings and manually turn it to all the way red, and then that's a problem because you can barely see anything. So what we did at Daylight was we made our own custom LEDs to have like a tiny bit of green, which your photoreceptors are more sensitive to, and then you can turn the brightness down. It has a lot of yellow, a lot of orange, and red, and then it's a more balanced spectrum.
So are you going to do a Kindle?
What do you mean?
Well, I want to be able to read.
Yeah, our product, the tablet we have, I'll show it around after, but it's basically a Kindle on steroids. So It's a Kindle that can be used for any other function, internet apps, etc.
And I have one more question. I spoke to Jalal Khan and I asked him about EMFs, and he said something, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's Egyptian lines. Can anyone remember?
Biogeometry?
Yes, biogeometry. What do you think of that?
I haven't taken a deep dive into biogeometry, but I could say like geopathic stress, like feng shui actually, is tied to the Earth's natural magnetic field. And there are like geopathic stress zones based on the field lines. Biogeometry, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole, but yeah.
I'll just say something quickly. I read a book and they talked about an old practice where you wanted to build a house, they'd put horses in the field, and wherever the horses would lay down to sleep, they knew that was the place of least geopathic stress, and they'd build the house there and put the bedroom where the horses slept. I suspect we probably have the ability to know where geopathic stress zones are, but yeah, all animals.
I think cats like geopathic stress, and then dogs avoid it. So, yeah.
Go dogs.
No, I'm serious. It's like a thing.
Yeah, with you use near infrared light and red light interchangeably. Can you differentiate the difference between the two, like red light or infrared light's warm, 53% of the spectrum, and then near infrared, that's not warm, that's close to, next to red, infrared light, is it? What's the difference between NIR and IR?
The nomenclature is not very clear. So in the research, they don't really differentiate. Sometimes near infrared and infrared are used interchangeably. Red, I'll tell you how I like to think about it. Red, we can see. Near infrared is the first part that we can't see after red before we get to the wavelengths that start to interact with water molecules, which is why we feel heat from infrared, because it starts to interact with the water molecules. Basically, yes. Yeah, the infrared light and heat, it's a very difficult thing to talk about. And I'm certainly not the person to differentiate between the two, but yes, essentially that's red we can see. Near infrared is the first part that is invisible to us, doesn't interact strongly with water, and you get that for a while, and then you get to infrared where it starts interacting with water, and that's where you get the thermal effect of longer wavelength light. I just want to also say about Cindy's question, with regard to being concerned about blue light at night, the ratio matters, and I think the ratio probably matters as much, if not more, than the spectral content. So Scott's bulb has blue and green in it, just like fire does, but the relative abundance of that visible light compared to the near infrared proportion is so minuscule. Whereas if you have a visible only light, like a cool white LED, the visible light is 100% of what you're getting. So I have no issues with getting a little bit of blue and green at night, because I know the relative abundance, the ratio of that visible to near infrared is so minuscule, it's being offset dramatically, which is what firelight does. There's still blues and greens in firelight, but it's offset so dramatically by the long wavelength light. So I think this focusing on one wavelength or one small portion is sort of hamstringing us when we should be thinking about ratios and relationships, because I think the ratio of visible light to the longer wavelength light is possibly more important than the actual, does this have 450 nanometers in it? And I think that people freak out too much about, oh, there's blue, it's bad. It's like, well, if blue's 1% of the whole spectral content, then does it really matter? So.
That's an interesting point you make, Cameron, because in your talk you mentioned that your goal is to unite the circadian and the light and life researchers who are quite siloed, and the circadian researchers are making visible only circadian friendly lighting, but their solution is just to make sure that there is no light in that 420 to 500 wavelength visible area, but they still haven't understood that we need that ratio of, we need that non-visible light, and we need a greater ratio to make it more ancestrally appropriate. So to be determined.
Okay, time for one more. Lisa, we'll finish with you.
Cameron, I've got a question for you regarding vitamin D. So I do DNA profiling, and we test for polymorphisms in genes, and one of them is the vitamin D receptors. So some populations have problem converting vitamin D from their skin on a cellular level, and the only way that I know that can activate those receptors is with sulforaphane. What would you say to that? Just that population just needs way more sunlight? It's about the...
I probably wouldn't say much, because I don't know very much about it. Mm-hmm. But genes and looking at genetic profiles can be a bit sketchy sometimes, because we don't know how they're all interacting with each other. So yes, you may have one polymorphism there, but you don't know how that might be compensated by others. It's interesting, you look at populations that eat lots of white rice, for instance, and the more carbohydrate you eat, the more thiamine, so B1 you need to process that. And in cultures where they eat lots of white rice, they also consume foods that basically help offset that. So green tea is something that that helps. I can't remember specifically, but there's all these relationships with all of the different foods that they're eating to help offset things that are going on genetically. And yeah, it's a very tricky thing. I mean, I don't really know how much to read into polymorphisms, because it's a thread in a tapestry. You know, you're taking one small piece of information, and if they are genuinely outside a lot, and they should be making a lot of vitamin D, and their levels aren't reflecting that, then maybe something's going on. But who knows? I mean, there's so many different factors that could be contributing to that as well. And to you have to be very careful with genetics, because the underlying message when you tell someone they've got a genetic polymorphism that's doing something bad is that the patient has no power over that whatsoever. And I think it's a very dangerous line to tread as a practitioner, to imply to your patient that they're helpless. Whether that's true or not, I think that needs to be sidestepped quite delicately, because you don't ever want your patient to think that they're helpless in the situation that they're in, and that their health outcome is predetermined, because I simply don't believe that. I don't think genes work like that. We don't really understand genetics very much at all. As well, like, we seem to think we understand what DNA is. I don't think we have the slightest clue what DNA is. So I'm very careful and cautious about talking about that kind of stuff, because I really don't understand it, and I don't think anyone does. But I think the main point is not to have people even subconsciously think that there's something wrong with them, and that that their health outcome is predetermined by a polymorphism of some description. So yeah, I wish I had a more helpful answer and say, oh yeah, just do this, this, and this, but I just don't know. Yeah.
The other point that perhaps could be made is that when we get beyond a certain window of UVB exposure, vitamin D is generated from this 7-dehydrocholesterol, but there is so-called irradiation products that actually get produced post vitamin D. So the vitamin D structure accepts more UVB light and then essentially gets photometabolized or photoconverted into other vitamin D-like products, like one's called testosterol, lumisterol. These have unique properties, and these have unique enzymatic transformation steps that are distinct from vitamin D itself. So whether there is some polymorphism, and that patient might be getting all kinds of benefits from these metabolite compounds that are not necessarily 25-hydroxy vitamin D, but they're still having the amazing anti-proliferative, anti-cancer effects, the amazing immunomodulatory effects, the amazing different cell differentiating effects on that keratinocyte layer. So we don't know. So I think that the answer is not that, oh, it's futile, go to Chemist Warehouse and grab a big box of 1000 IU tablets. It's, still work on these principles, because as Cameron mentioned in his talk, 25-hydroxy vitamin D and that storage form, that's only the tiniest sliver of the whole picture of sunlight and health.
All right. Thanks, guys. Give it up for Max, Tristan, Cameron, and Kiera.